Okay. Moving on now to our media picks for the month, or rather, should I say, media pick of the month. Can I just briefly just get out of the way a little bit of media news, though, just to highlight these links, and then we'll get into the meat, as it were, of this segment. Or the deliciously flavoured falafel, depending on what you prefer. So first and foremost, we have news from James Mangold, the director of the upcoming Indiana Jones 5. Well, not so much absolutely confirmed news, but certainly compelling evidence of the setting of Indiana Jones 5, and that would be that it's going to be in the 1960s and in New York. Hmm, interesting. Um, I don't suppose there's much to add to that, but apparently that's the report is that that's where the director's head is at the moment. Several of his projects are set in the 1960s and in New York. So I wonder what Indy's up to.
Probably trying to prevent the rise of a certain bouffon-haired, comb-overed property developer
Oh, I see. I
who's
see.
who's actually a KGB agent.
Right. Okay. Well, there you go. That's good
I
to
think
know.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you. Um, uh, the second thing as well is that there's going to be a new Indiana Jones computer game, produced, published it seems I think by Bethesda, but not produced by Bethesda, but rather produced by a company that's been responsible for um, less controversial and badly made games than Bethesda, shall we put it that way? So at the moment there's a very limited little trailer out there. It's literally just Indy's desk, but it was announced as a joint production, I think, with Lucasfilm. So Lucasfilm Games are licensing it, and Machine
Right.
Games are the people who are going to be making it. So I'm looking forward to that. A new Indiana Jones game. It's been a while. Um, and also as well, Crystal Dynamics have announced that they're going to be making a 25th, I think, anniversary Tomb Raider game, or a game certainly in the context of the 25th anniversary, that will tie their prequel trilogy that they've made in recent years in with the classic Tomb Raider story arc. This is important for Tomb Raider and Lara Croft fans to see how these things might merge together. I can tell you that you're really excited by this prospect, Andy. But nonetheless, that's the other little bit of news I wanted just to announce in this segment.
I
Um,
tend to watch these things rather than play the games because I'm not games to the level that you are, but although I might have some news on that in the future,
oh,
but
really? Interesting.
I'll tell you after. I'll tell you afterwards.
Okay.
Uh, but no, in all seriousness, no, look, I mean, it's great. We've got two archaeological archetypes who are cultural icons in the games world. What's not to like?
Well, what's not to
Watch this
like?
space. Yes.
Also, with arguably earlier this month, we saw possibly a third entry into that trinity of pop culture archaeologists, certainly worthy of entry, in the form of a performance by Ray Fiennes in Netflix's The Dig. I have a fairly pithy summary of my thoughts on this film because I could ramble on about this forever. And I don't want to, but at the very least, I guess we should begin with just how excited were you, and is the answer yes?
Look, given the pretty much the entire, with certain notable exceptions, which can maybe come to their reservations about it, but with certain notable exceptions, the archaeological Twitter sphere has been wetting itself about the dig for the
Yeah.
last 2 weeks because it on the face of it, it's a respectable, rather beautiful evocation of archaeology on film with no whips, no guns, and no Nazis. Well, the Nazis are off stage
Hmm.
and they don't appear till the third act. Um, but it's basic. What the dig is, it's a classic British costume drama. It's been produced by Netflix. It's based um, on a novel by John Preston, which came out in 2007. John Preston's a journalist, but also a novelist, and it turns out he found out afterwards he's actually he claims he found out afterwards that he is actually related to one of the leading characters, Peggy Piggott, aka Margaret Guido. who was actually there at Sutton Hoo as one of the leading excavators.
Mm.
Um, it's a classic British costume drama because it deals with issues like class, like landscape, like sexuality, um, World War II, um, and it takes as its backdrop to explore those issues the excavation of the Sutton Hoo burial mound one um, by initially local archaeologist called Basil Brown, played by Ray Fiennes, who was hired by the landowner Edith Pretty because she wanted to find out what these mounds were on her land. She had a hunch that they were important, and there are suggestions that she had some kind of revelation about that there was a buried king. This is surrounded with both folklore and archaeological folklore, so it's a fabulous story in the first place. It's one of the great stories of British archaeology, and that Basil Brown began this excavation right on the eve of World War II, and then when it became apparent quite how significant the burial was in the Sutton Hoo Mound, the British Museum and the authorities intervened and sent in a team led by Charles Phillips,
Mm.
and including people like Stuart Piggott and his then new wife Peggy Piggott, who'd been excavating elsewhere and were brought in amongst others to work on the excavation. It explores that. It interpolates an ahistorical or apparently ahistorical love story between Peggy Piggott, played by Lily James, and a um, a photographer, the dig photographer, who is presented as the nephew, I think it is, of Edith Pretty,
Mm.
um, who actually didn't exist.
No.
And I think this is where we start to get into some of the reservations of some of our colleagues, at least, but which we can discuss in a minute. But basically, essentially, it is a beautifully made, beautifully acted um, film that looks at, yes, it looks at archaeology or uses archaeology as as the vehicle, but like all these things, it's about much more than that. And to say it's a film about archaeology is simplistic. Yes, archaeology and history and place are very important to it, but so are other things.
They are. They
But
are. But we also, as archaeologists, and on a segment all about archaeology, um,
yeah,
sh shouldn't shy away from expressing how, for example, in my case, I was very impressed within the first 5 minutes. I think it was 4.5, maybe 3.5 minutes. We had
yeah,
very solid, but also understated exploration of key archaeological guiding principles and philosophy.
mm,
Um,
yeah,
Basil is momentarily irked by the notion that Edith might just want to recover treasure as opposed to actually telling a
mhm,
story. Um,
yeah,
he in the opening moments of the film, I think this is in the trailer as well, he's sort of saying, I reckon we're in someone's burial ground here. And there's a familiarity with landscape. There's a natural move to interpretation. There's a desire to tell a story and to recover lives, and we'll come to that in just a second. It's a beautiful
mm,
moment in the film that unfolds.
yeah,
That is at the heart of what archaeologists do and why they do it. And in an age
yes,
when archaeology is all too often represented, especially in newspapers, as being the output and the preserve of metal detectorists, and oh, how much is that worth, is often the key question. This
yeah,
film posits that the value of what's recovered is in the form of legacy and the story that's uncovered. Now, I'll just read the pithiness just so I can summarize my thoughts because
go on then.
I don't want to ramble on. So,
No,
legacy could have been pulled out of the script a little bit more in this movie, though the matter of fact way that archaeological theory, method, and philosophy is worked into the film is rare. The exploration of Basil's motivations was subtle, but also utterly believable. The filmmakers even resisted showing any dream imagery, which I think would have been perfectly acceptable, of a warrior vision, for example, amongst the mounds that Edith Pretty is supposedly thought to have had, opting instead for occasional drop-in focus and dreamily drifting the camera, the cinematography presumably underscoring her feeling about the mound. And likely a through thread of legacy in the face of mortality as well. They underscore the fact that she's about to, to face possibly her death in this film, that
Yeah, she
drove
did, in
even.
fact, die in 1943, 2 years later, three
Yeah,
years later.
yeah. So again, there are dramatic, there's dramatic license taken, but I'll come back to that in a moment. Um,
Mm.
This led her to hire an archaeologist. The hero archaeologist didn't brandish a gun nor a flaming torch. There wasn't a treasure map or a race with a chain of clues that were being wittily uncovered. There was no magic, no mysticism, explosions or bad guys. Despite Nazis being on the horizon, it would have been so tempting to pull Nazis into this story, and they weren't really pulled in. They are the background context of history. There were no clockwork dungeon mechanisms and no booby traps. This was a tremendously refreshing experience. Um, it was an understated film, not merely treasure hungry, and none of this is to be taken for granted from Hollywood. That's more or less that's my thoughts on the film. And what I would say just to you in the context of this
Mm.
segment, Andy, is this is what I've been getting at for years, years and years and years on how to talk about and show archaeology in film. I'm not expecting absolute, you know, adherence to the reality of, for example, the characters surrounding the dig. I'm not expecting uh, the director not to have any artistic freedom in how they present the story. But if you're going to tell a story about a real archaeological period or find
Mm.
in this case, there are ways to present it that make it compelling and exciting and interesting without having to introduce all those fanciful elements that I just alluded to. I was so impressed with this film, and
Mm.
also more than happy for there to be artistic license mixed in.
I'm pleased you said that, because some of our colleagues are less happy with that,
Yeah.
and we can maybe discuss why and our response to that in a moment. I think it's interesting. Many things are interesting about this film.
Hmm.
Um, and it's interesting that we're discussing it in the context of having discussed Queen of the Desert relatively recently,
Hmm.
as a media pick, where you had Nicole Kidman playing a pioneering woman archaeologist,
Mm.
and in fact, Nicole Kidman was first choice casting for Edith Pretty,
Right.
and then she, for whatever reason, couldn't do it, or didn't do it in the end, and so
But she
Kerry
would have been
Mulligan was
closer
passed.
in age, wouldn't she, to the real life
She
Edith
would have
Pretty?
been, although you could argue that she would have had to have glammed down rather than glammed up to play the role. If you look at the photographs of the real Edith Pretty,
Mm.
um, this is pretty, but that's a happenstance of filmmaking. Casting falls through, and so on. And again, I think Karen Mulligan plays the part beautifully. Although she's 20 years too young to play it. In fact, to me, it didn't bother me in the slightest, because she, first of all, it's a sort of ageless part almost, and
Mm.
particularly when she it becomes apparent that she is very ill.
Mm.
She actually almost visibly ages on screen.
Yes.
Um, but at the same time, there's also an accent on youth. A key figure is her young son,
Mm.
who develops a relationship with Basil Brown through a shared love of space and astrology. And far from being interested in archaeology, the boy is interested in space and Buck Rogers, and charges around a lot of the time in a sort of silver
Mm.
foil space helmet, and
Mm.
so on, straight out of a Buck Rogers serial of the period. There's almost a sense of the past, the present, and the future
Mm.
in the narrative for that reason.
Mm. And also, I
Um,
suppose there's a beautiful through thread there, in so much as when the boy and Basil are discussing, imagining what had been in the ground, the boat being dragged up from the river, and this person being
yeah,
sent on their last voyage. The boy then folds in voyage imagery into his
yeah,
moon and space exploration games and
absolutely.
fantasies. So
Yeah,
and again, you see, once again, it's not, we didn't have a moment where Basil goes, no, no, you can't be imaginative with this stuff.
yeah,
Actually, interpretation and imagination are encouraged. It's just not,
yes.
well, if we go back to the Muppet of the Month segment, it's just not bollocks. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
it's actual understated, and very human led storytelling. And
Very
actually,
much so.
if you don't mind, I'll just sort of mention there's a conversation between Basil and his wife at one point in this film
Mm.
where she's saying, "Well, you didn't get into this for the money, did you?" This kind of thing, which I thought was wonderful. But also, he she's talking about how his work is leaving a legacy of understanding of through the stuff that he's recovered through his career, and he
Yeah.
says, "Well, yes, I guess, but also these are lives, these are people that we're finding."
Well,
Um,
can I make a point there
mhm.
actually? Because I think I, it's a line that struck me so much that I actually tweeted about, and I've just noticed a typo in the tweet, which is really. I wish they bloody let you edit tweets when you put them out. Anyway, but the screenplay is by Maureen Buffini from the novel. It's a beautifully written film,
Mm,
um, and there's uh, a two-line dialogue between Basil Brown and Mrs. Pretty as they're walking back to across the field after the digs ended for the day.
mm,
And to me, I mean, I suggested that maybe it should be the subject of perhaps the first undergraduate essay for anybody studying archaeology. It's a discuss line. She says to him, "Am I doing the right thing at someone's grave?"
mm,
And Basil Brown replies, "No, no, that's life what's revealed. That's why we dig."
yeah,
And to me, that's the essence of archaeology.
yeah, yeah,
In
ab-
two lines, it's brilliant, beautiful.
absolutely. And in that sense, it's a theme that's subtly explored in different ways throughout the film.
Yes.
And and again, in that sense, it's revealing precisely why we do what we do, why we're interested in this stuff,
Yeah.
and also actually, I thought again, the storytelling license here within the bounds of real world hazards. So, for example, there's a
Mm.
moment when he's dug a section out of the mound, and first of all, Edith, goes and stands in the section, and I'm like, I'm very nervous about. Oh, you shouldn't be next to that. That could fall on you because obviously
Yeah.
stepping trenches is the way to make deep holes safer, and you're less likely to be
Yeah.
buried alive. And then the next moment, and this is a light spoiler, but I hope if well, sod it, if if you're watching this, you're going to go and watch the film immediately. Um, if you haven't already. But the next moment, Basil is in fact buried alive in this collapse. We don't know that that happened. In fact, it's highly likely that it didn't happen because he was a very experienced digger. But thematically, it worked. There was something beautiful about the imagery of him being pulled out of the soil, almost in the fetal
Yes.
position. It was like
Yeah.
imagery of rebirth, imagery of the burial
Absolutely.
itself in the mound,
Absolutely.
imagery of actually the country about to enter a state of war with
Mm.
a Germanic enemy while uncovering an incursion of Germanic cultured people. It's a there's so much going on there, and again I think the well, as I
And
say,
the
as I've been saying for
mm.
years, there's room to play. There is room to play. Just get the
Yes.
basics right.
Absolutely, and that kind of imagery is picked up throughout the film, as you say. There's another key image. Again, it's ahistorical as far as we can tell.
Hmm.
But there is a moment towards the end of the film when there's a constant motif of Spitfires flying over the site. It's
Hmm.
the RAF's training for the war that's about to happen.
Hmm.
A lot of RAF bases in East Anglia where the film is set,
Hmm.
and near the end of the film, one of the aircraft gets into trouble and crashes in the river, what's supposed to be the River Deben,
Hmm.
and the pilot is killed.
Hmm.
And so there's imagery of fallen warriors in water, and then there's this moment when the aircraft is being recovered from the water by the crash investigators to recover the aircraft and the body, and the aircraft with the pilot still in it is pulled from the river
Yeah.
in the same way that the original Sutton Hoo boat will have been pulled from the river
Hmm.
up the ridge and onto the heath.
Hmm.
And this is all very, very deliberate,
Hmm.
um, but it doesn't appear particularly forced. When you're watching it, it appears, oh yeah, that works, that works, that works. It's not. The imagery is there. The cues for you to think about these things are all there, but they're not hammered at
No,
you.
no, it's wonderfully
Um,
understated.
it
I
is beautifully done.
suppose in the last couple of minutes of this segment, I
Mm.
suppose what I would say is obviously there are problems. The presentation of Peggy Pigott as a character has irritated an awful lot of people. I think quite rightly. She's shown as being
I
a bit greener than she likely
I
was.
disagree, but
No,
there you are.
no, I know, but I'm mentioning this
Hmm.
for fairness.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely, yeah, yeah,
And there are questions there about the presentation of her character.
yeah.
There are also
And also about the two female photographers who took the very famous
yes,
Sutton Hoo photographs, who have been replaced by
missing
Rory Lomax, this invented
yeah
character of a
yeah
photographer. So
for
that
her
has been criticised too.
to have an interaction with. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So there are questions there about that. But these are questions that also tie in with broader questions about the representation of women at the time in archaeology. For
Mhm.
example, the
Mhm.
excavations at Skara Brae being a famous
Yeah,
example of this.
yes.
There's also as well slightly more hopefully tongue-in-cheek problems that some people have with the geology of the house that she lives in. Apparently, apparently the rocks of Edith's house are the wrong type of rock for Suffolk.
And I think
But
somebody pointed out that lemon drizzle cake might not have been served at a tea party in 1939, but I
yeah,
mean, for
yeah,
Christ.
exactly. Yeah, but I think I don't put lemon drizzle cake in the same category as Peggy Pigott, just for the record. So I think there are. It's not a perfect film in terms of representation and so on and so forth, but
It's a drama.
it's a drama and it's a damn good archaeological movie.
Yes.
And I think as an introduction to, if not, I mean, as I say, those opening few minutes, as an introduction to the motivations of archaeologists and to how we approach landscape. Frankly, just that subtle, that beautiful, subtle way that the camera follows the archaeologist into this little part of the landscape. He's looking around, he's taking it in, and doing what we I suppose we've been trained to do, but also what I think lots of archaeologists do quite naturally before they become archaeologists anyway. I think we tend to be quite imaginative and history focused and curious people. He is putting himself into that headspace. He's thinking, what would this have been 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago? It's all done, but without any special effects. There's no like wipe of the landscape to show, to show.
Yeah.
I mean, also as well, another thing, it can't be we shouldn't understate the fact that they also resisted a dramatization of the burial. They could have shown a burial happening. I mean,
Mm.
maybe not because of budgetary constraints, but yeah, they could. There's an awful lot of stuff that they could have done with this film, which I would have been happy with if they'd shown a dramatization of the burial, if they'd shown Edith's dreams and the spiritualism and all this kind of thing that led her supposedly to want to excavate the mounds. But they
Mm.
resisted it for a sort of a realistic, and I use that in the sort of the story genre use of the word, possibly a little
Yeah.
bit of magical realism going on. Um, it's magnificent. It's definitely, if someone says, you know, can I borrow a DVD of an archaeological film, please? I will
Mm.
lend them this, well, the Blu-ray, frankly, I'll probably get for the extras.
Yes.
Um,
We all will. We all will. But
any final thoughts or words?
just that there have there have been criticism of detail. There are criticisms of detail. There are criticisms of particularly the presentation of Peggy Pigott.
Hmm.
Um, Personally, I think it's a legitimate conceit of the screenwriter and the director to to interpret characters and write. It's not a drama documentary. It's a
No.
drama based on a novel,
Hmm.
and you can do things in a drama and a novel which you wouldn't do in a documentary. People have made the analogy with Shakespeare. Richard III's a great play. It's lousy history.
Yeah.
This isn't a monograph about Sutton Hoo.
No. No.
It's a film called The Dig based on a novel called The Dig,
Yes.
and it's trying to do different things.
Mm.
And but the other thing I would say, picking up your point about the way the archaeology is presented in it, I do. I'm saddened when people. I can understand why people do it, but when people present archaeology as a science, it's not. What this shows is that it's a humanity. It's a mashup of art and science and thinking and imagination and technical skills
Okay,
and so
yeah,
on.
I'll
It's
take
so
that.
much more. It's so much more than just one academic field.
No, well, yes, of course it is, but you can't deny that there are serious. We don't just make stuff up, like, So scientific method is the guiding principle by which we gather data,
And historical
interpretation of
method.
that data. Sorry,
And historical method.
and historical methods, absolutely, yes.
Yeah,
Document, yeah,
that's exactly. That's what I
yeah.
mean. It's not one thing.
No,
People say. I think people try and say, "Oh, archaeology is a science," because it makes it sound more respectable. I quite like being the scruffy, slightly undisciplined urchin that runs in and out of between the legs of the other fields and
science-led,
disciplines.
humanities adjacent. There you go.
No, humanity informed by science.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I'll take that. I'll take that. Yeah, cool.
But either way, if people have got a Netflix subscription, watch The Dig. If you haven't got a Netflix subscription, get one if you want, if you can afford it, because it's worth it. I think they do a free trial, so get the free trial and watch The Dig and then cancel it. But
It's
either
worth
way,
it's worth delving into. Thank you.
yeah, I mean, given from what we were saying, the next archaeology film we see, the next film with an archaeologist, the hero that we see, is likely to be Indiana Jones, hobbling around New York on a Zimmer frame
Hmm.
in the 1960s. Then take The Dig now while you can. and,
Indeed,
and
inoculate yourself. Inoculate yourself.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. And ignore the fact that the trowels are wrong for 1931 or 1939, as somebody else pointed out.
Indeed, indeed. Speaking of which, they don't like it. They don't like it. um,
Perhaps we should do a sort of Errol Flynn tribute.
yeah, yeah. Or a little bit of.
Can
Anyway,
I just point out to
yes.
our viewer, this is actually an Archaeosoup bottle opener,
Oh,
which was a
yes,
gift from your good self, and I
yes.
very much appreciate. And
Oh, good, 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 good. Does it see
are
much
they are they
use?
still are they still available?
They are, yes.
Yes, oh, right, there we are. So there they are, viewer. Here's the a message from our sponsor. Uh,
Indeed, yes. You can find the Etsy link on the Archaeosoup YouTube channel. Um, it's been a pleasure. It has been actually a relatively timely month this month. I think we've done quite well on the time front. And
you know, touch wood as well. We've not apart from a few screw ups that are mainly down to me losing my train of thoughts. We've not had any technical issues, principally,
no, no, no,
really, to
no,
speak
no.
of.
I'm happy about that. I suppose all that
Ah,
remains to say is thank you guys for watching and or listening. If there's any archaeological news stories you want us to examine in the coming weeks and months, always feel free to send them our way and we will do so. And hopefully you enjoy the conversation below. As ever,
absolutely.
until next time, do take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.